All right, let's talk about something we all use every single day, probably without even thinking about it, the cloud. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and demystify it, because what's really going on under the hood, let's dive in.
I mean, just think about it for a second. Your photos, your work files, your entire email history, it all just lives up there in the cloud. We trust it with pretty much everything. But what is it we're actually trusting? What is this whole digital world built on?
You know, it's so easy to just think of it as some kind of digital magic, right? But it's not. And really understanding what it's made of, that's the absolute first step to understanding how to keep everything we put up there safe.
So, to really get a handle on cloud security, we have to start with the blueprint. We've got to look at the physical foundation that our digital lives are actually built on.
At its most basic level, cloud infrastructure is just that: physical stuff, servers, storage, software, networks. But the best way to picture it is to think of a massive, super high-tech apartment building. It's got all the core wiring, the plumbing, the structural supports that let thousands of different people, we call them tenants, live and work inside.
And of course, every great apartment building needs a building manager. In the cloud, that manager is called the hypervisor. It's this incredibly smart piece of software that takes one huge physical server and basically slices it up into dozens of separate private apartments. We call those virtual machines. Now, this building manager, the hypervisor, holds all the master keys and decides who gets which apartment and how many resources they can use. Keep this one in your back pocket. The hypervisor is absolutely crucial.
Okay, so now that we have our blueprint of the building, let's talk about the risks. And this is where it gets really, really interesting. The security threats themselves, they aren't actually new. We're dealing with the same old problems, but now they're playing out in a completely new and way more complex arena.
This quote from the research really just hits the nail on the head. The cloud doesn't invent new ways to attack. It just makes the old ways so much more damaging. Think about it like this. A leaky pipe is a hassle in a single-family house, right? But that same leaky pipe in a 100-story apartment building, that's a full-blown catastrophe. And this brings us to what is maybe the single biggest point of confusion in cloud security: the trust boundary. It's this invisible line that separates what the cloud provider, the owner of the building, is responsible for, versus what you, the tenant, are responsible for.
This really sums up the whole problem, doesn't it? The biggest worry that people have is what they call altered trust boundaries. It's a fancy way of saying they're just not sure where the building owner's job ends and their own begins. I mean, who's responsible for the main entrance? And who's responsible for the lock on your own apartment door?
Okay, so let's go back to our building manager, the hypervisor. It turns out that the security of the entire building often boils down to protecting this one single component.
So, if you had to guess, what do you think is the single biggest weak point in this whole cloud infrastructure?
Yep, you got it. It's the hypervisor. Because it controls everything, the creation, the management, the isolation of every single virtual machine, if an attacker manages to compromise the hypervisor, they don't just get access to one apartment. They get the master keys to the entire building. They could potentially spy on, disrupt, or even destroy the data of every single tenant inside.
Now, not all building managers are created equal. You have what's called a Type 1, or bare metal hypervisor. This runs right on the server's hardware, which makes it super efficient and secure. This is what the big players like AWS and Azure use. Then there's Type 2, which runs on top of a normal operating system like Windows. The main thing to note here is that Type 1 is just way more secure because there are fewer things for a hacker to target.
And look, this threat is not just theoretical. It is very, very real. A report from IBM found that a staggering 35% of vulnerabilities in this space could let an attacker do something called a VM escape. That literally means breaking out of their own apartment to go and attack the building manager directly. This is a real risk.
So, with all these shared risks and all this confusion, how do we sort out that trust boundary problem? How do we finally figure out who's responsible for what? Well, the industry's answer is something called the shared responsibility model.
This is where it all starts to click. Let's use our apartment analogy to break this down. First up, IaaS, or Infrastructure as a Service. Think of this as renting a totally empty but very secure apartment. The provider handles the building's security, but you're responsible for everything you put inside: the furniture, your data, everything. Next is PaaS, Platform as a Service. This is like renting a furnished apartment. The provider handles the basics, but you're still in charge of your personal stuff. And finally, SaaS, Software as a Service. This is like a full-service hotel. They handle pretty much everything. You just have to make sure you lock your own suitcase.
So you see, in every single one of those scenarios, the provider is responsible for securing the core infrastructure, the building itself. And trust me, they take this part of the job incredibly seriously. Let's take a quick look at how the giants of the cloud world handled their end of the deal.
Take Amazon Web Services, AWS. They have dozens of major compliance certifications. You can think of these as building codes that prove their apartment buildings are up to the absolute highest safety standards. We're talking data centers in anonymous, bullet-resistant buildings with insane levels of access control, plus sophisticated systems to stop what's basically a digital mob trying to break down the front door.
Then you have Microsoft Azure. They use a multi-layered defense. They create firewalled, partition networks to isolate traffic, which is kind of like creating secure, separate wings within their apartment building. They also have specialized compliance programs for industries like healthcare and finance, making sure their buildings are perfect for those specific tenants.
And Google Cloud has its own unique spin. They run their entire infrastructure on a custom-built, security-hardened operating system. They've got a 24/7 security team just watching internal traffic for anything suspicious, and they even pay outside researchers to try and find holes in their systems. Pretty smart, right?
So, what's the big takeaway from all of this? It's pretty simple, actually. Cloud security is a partnership. It just is. The big providers are spending billions to secure the fundamental infrastructure, the building itself. But at the end of the day, you are always responsible for securing what you put inside your own apartment, your applications, and your data.
Which really just leaves us with one final question for you to think about. You've chosen a provider you trust to protect the building, to watch the hallways, and to secure the foundation. But are you taking that final critical step? Are you locking your own front door?